be on your best behavior.
Yes, exactly. Aloha from Maui tonight, guys. We have Jim tonight as our speaker for the Veterans Day, what's coming up tomorrow. So, Jim, it's up to you now. Your stage.
Okay. See if I can share my screen.
Oh, nice.
Can you see the Marine?
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
Yeah, I have to move some of these things out of my way.
246th birthday today.
That's right. We had a color ceremony at work today. So welcome everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about Veterans Day and our members that have served. I want to start talking about Rolling Thunder, which was canceled in 2020 due to the COVID epidemic. A permit was initially approved for Rolling Thunder 34 to occur on May 30th, 2021, but it was canceled in March. This is the first time in 30 years that a permit was denied. I was especially disappointed that the Pentagon denied their request to use their parking lot. So the event start was relocated to RFK Stadium, where about 50,000 motorcycles participated. Pictured here is a U.S. Marine that salutes participants every year. The mission of the event is to bring attention to those 86,444 service members unaccounted for since World War I. The ride also highlights veteran suicide problem. The event is also called Rolling to Remember, but after 34 years with the same name, it is going to be hard to change.
Mm-hmm.
Every year I dedicate this to Dr. Steve Cromwell. May he rest in peace. He is the bravest man I ever met, and he never picked up a gun. He was a corpsman on the first wave of the landing on Omaha Beach. The stories he told me were horrifying, so every year I mention him to remember him. In 1918, on the 11th hour, the 11th day, in the 11th month, the world rejoiced and celebrated. After 4 years of bitter war, an armistice was signed. The war to end all wars was over. The First World War left 9 million soldiers dead and 21 million wounded, with Germany, Russia, Austria, France, and Great Britain each losing nearly 1 million or more lives. In addition, at least 5 million civilians died from disease, starvation, or exposure. For the most part, the people of Europe greeted the outbreak of World War I with jubilation. Most patriotically assumed that their country would be victorious within months. By the end of 1914, well over 1 million soldiers of various nationalities had been killed in the battlefields of Europe. And neither for the Allies nor the Central Powers was a final victory in sight. Remembrance Day in Canada is to remember those who fought for them. It is also recognized by a 2-minute moment of silence at 11 a.m. It is interesting to note that Mexico celebrated its first Mexican Veterans Day, excuse me, on September 14th, 1895. Now Mexican Armed Forces Day, Army, Navy, and the Air Force is part of the Army and Marine Corps is part of the Navy. Mexican Armed Forces Day is celebrated on 19th February ever since 1950. This is in commemoration of the decree that created the services in 1917. Specialist Wendell served in the Army for 5 years from 1999 to 2004. She served in both Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom as an Arabic linguist. She has many good and sad memories of her service. Most memorable was when they crossed the border from Kuwait into Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. She had never seen poverty like that in her life, and there were so many kids. All of them were elated to see the soldiers, and they ran alongside the vehicles as the convoy went through small villages in southern Iraq while en route to the Anbar province. None of the children had shoes, and they were all asking for food. She cried a lot that day. She cried because she missed her son Jonathan, who was about 18 months old, and because of so many strong emotions for those kids and their families. She knew what the U.S. military was doing would have a positive effect on their lives. She has fond memories of being part of a team that rebuilt 9 schools in Iraq. Amanda is pictured here riding her Indian motorcycle. I am proud of Amanda and her service. Captain Jackson served from May 1981 until December 1986, which was followed by several years as a civil servant with the U.S. Army Tank Automotive Command. While serving at Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, they were in-crossing Cuban refugees. Around 1900, one day his commander asked Jerry if they wanted to work late and finish that night, or if they wanted to wait till tomorrow. If they worked late, the commander said, he would make sure that they got to eat. They decided to finish that night, but when they got done, the commander denied making any statement about food. Jerry stepped up to the plate and got the chow hall opened up and sent someone into town for pizza. They had a great time that evening, and his troops always remembered Jerry looking out for them. They made sure that they reciprocated and taught him as much as possible during his tenure. Jerry also made a presentation to the UN researchers at NATO headquarters and almost caused an international incident. The translators told Jerry that jokes don't translate well and he shouldn't tell any. Within minutes of starting, Jerry didn't think it was going that well, so he told the joke. The translators weren't happy, but the crowd laughed. In fact, it went well enough that the French delegation invited Jerry to visit their research and development center. I'm proud of Jerry and his service. Lieutenant Colonel Cram served in the U.S. Army from 1970 until 1995. Excuse me. He spent 2 years as an enlisted man. He realized that an officer's life was much more comfortable, so he went to officer candidate school and was commissioned. He served as an artillery officer. When he was enlisted, he was assigned to a communications section in Germany. One day while in the field, they sent one of the new guys out to find some frequency grease. This fellow looked around for about an hour before he decided to check at headquarters. He arrived just as the one-star general and the E8 platoon sergeant were coming down the stairs. Not to be deterred, the rookie asked the general where he might find some frequency grease. The general looked at the platoon sergeant, who said, "I will handle this, sir," which pretty much meant extra duty for everyone involved. But John says it was worth it. If you recall last year's story about his getting in trouble in OCS, it appears that John's had several run-ins with military leadership. John is a member of the International Fellowship of Rotarian Military Veterans and rides a beautiful Indian shown in the lower left corner. I'm proud of Indian John and his service. On the Western Front, the battle line stretched across northern France and Belgium. Combatants settled down in the trenches for a terrible war of attrition. In 1918, the infusion of American troops and resources into the Western Front finally tipped the scale in the Allies' favor. Germany signed an armistice agreement with the Allies on November 11, 1918. World War I was known as a war to end all wars because of the great slaughter and destruction it caused. Unfortunately, the peace treaty that officially ended the conflict, the Treaty of Versailles of 1919, forced punitive measures on Germany that destabilized Europe and laid the groundwork for World War II. November 11th was set aside as Armistice Day in the United States to remember the sacrifices that men and women made during the war in order to ensure a lasting peace. On Armistice Day, soldiers who survived the war marched in a parade through their hometowns. Politicians, veterans gave speeches and held ceremonies of thanks for the peace that they had won. On November 11th, we still have the opportunity to remember the efforts of those special people that have served and died in service to our nation. In remembering, we pay homage to those who bravely responded to their country's needs. During Keith Lundgren's first attempt at college, he majored in beer drinking and partying. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, and he ended up in the Marine Corps as a radar technician for a Hawk anti-air missile system. He served for 4 years, 14 months of which were in country Vietnam. Keith was awarded a Purple Heart when he was in a Jeep following a truck that hit a landmine. There were several casualties, but luckily Keith made it. Another of his memories in Vietnam includes his system misidentifying and launching a missile towards a French airliner heading for Da Nang. Due to the crew's quick thinking and immediate action, they were able to self-destruct the missile, averting disaster. As we heard in a previous meeting, Keith rode his cousin CB-350 around Oahu in 1966 when he was there on R&R. Later, Keith also served during the Dominican Republic Civil War, and on their way back home via Navy landing ship tank, LST, they hit a storm. Many of those Marines went topside but returned their lunch back to the sea. I am proud of Keith and his service. On November 11th, we wear poppies. We pause for 2 minutes of silent tribute, and we attend commemorative ceremonies in memory of our wartime dead. Poppies are worn as a flower of remembrance, a reminder of the blood-red flower that still grows on the site of battles fought in France and Belgium. Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, during the terrible bloodshed of the Second Battle of Ypres in the spring of 1915, wrote the poem In Flanders Fields of these flowers which lived among the graves of dead soldiers. The flowers and the larks in the poem serve as reminders of nature's ability to withstand the destructive elements of war by men, a symbol of hope in a period of human despair. The poppy was adopted for symbolic purposes after the First World War. A French woman, Madame Guérin, suggested to Field Marshal Errol Haig of the British forces that women and children in devastated areas of France could produce poppies for sale. The first British Poppy Day appeal was in November 1921 and has continued since in Britain and other countries. In America, many of the poppies which we wear are made by disabled veterans. We wear the poppies as a reminder of those who died while fighting for peace and as reminders of the horrors of conflict and the beauties of peace. Laterman second class Robert Preston served aboard the USS Tulare from 1968 to 1972. He served in 3 campaigns during the Vietnam conflict, and during one of the cruises, the ship had a port visit in Japan. Many of the crew purchased motorcycles, which the Navy allowed them to put on the ship to get them home, under the condition that if the ship was redirected back to the Tonkin Gulf, the motorcycles would all be pushed over the side into the ocean. Robert was lucky enough to get his Honda CL350 he purchased back to San Diego, where he rode it for a year. On one nice day, Rob took his wife Sue for a ride. They ended up on a country road, took a turn down a path, and was headed towards a decline and ditch when he felt his wife trying to jump off the bike. That ride ended her desire to ride on a motorcycle, and after 50 years, she won't let him forget it. When he was ready to get out of the Navy and go back to Maryland, he built a trailer and towed the bike back to Maryland. Excuse me. Robert still feels a tinge of regret for selling that Honda, as he bought it for $350 and sold it for $800, which paid for the birth of his first child. He got her to ride on the Goldwing 3 or 4 times, but she still didn't like it. He was probably better off with his Super Tenera anyway. I am proud of Robert in his service. David Doherty joined the Army Reserves when he was a junior in high school in 1957. His brother Edward was a commanding officer of the local reserve unit in Brookville, Pennsylvania. Immediately after graduating from high school, David and his best friend left for basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. We were quite close and they got to bunk together. He slept in the upper bunk and his friend, being a lot shorter, got the bottom bunk. He was a snorer. His friend was a snorer who shook the rafters. If he fell asleep before David did, he would lean over and holler at him until he woke up, just to ask him if he was asleep yet. Then he'd hurry and fall asleep before his friend fell asleep again. 4 months later, they transferred to Fort Dix, New Jersey for advanced infantry training. David spent 6 years in an infantry reserve unit and then about 3 years in a civil affairs company. David's family has a long history of service as well. He had 3 older brothers who served in World War II. His oldest brother, Dan, was killed in the Philippines in 1941. His brothers, Ed and Mike, fulfilled their military obligations and returned home. His brother, Mike, had some sort of injury and met an Army nurse whom he married. Ed stayed in the reserve for about 30 years and retired as a colonel. His sister Catherine's husband also served in World War II. I am proud of David and his family's service. Cryptologic technician Seaman Thomas Dines was assigned to Naval Postgraduate School and the Defense Language Institute to learn Vietnamese in order to function as a linguist. He was then transferred to Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas. Tom was ultimately released from service after 18 months for medical reasons. Tom is now a seasonal resident of Marco Island, Florida, and Breckenridge, Colorado. I am proud of Tom's service. Also in 1921, an unknown World War I American soldier was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. This site on a hillside overlooking the Potomac River in the city of Washington became the focal point of reverence for America's veterans. Congress voted Armistice Day legal holiday in 1938, 20 years after the war ended. But by now, Americans realized that the previous war would not be the last. From 1921 to 1930, Armistice Day was held on the Monday of the week in which November 11th fell. In 1931, Alan Neal, member of Parliament for Comox Albany, introduced a bill to observe Armistice Day only on November 11th. Passed by the House of Commons, the bill also changed the name to Remembrance Day. The first Remembrance Day was observed on November 11th, 1931. Every year on November 11, Canadians pause in a moment of silence to honor and remember the men and women who have served and continue to serve Canada during times of war, conflict, and peace. We remember the more than 2,300,000 Canadians who have served throughout our nation's history and the more than 118,000 who made the ultimate sacrifice. The poppy is a symbol of Remembrance Day as well. Replica poppies are sold by the Royal Canadian Legion to provide assistance to veterans. Remembrance Day is a federal statutory holiday in Canada. It is also a statutory holiday in 3 territories: Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, and in 6 provinces: British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and Labrador. The national ceremony is held at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. The Governor General of Canada presides over the ceremony. It is also attended by the Prime Minister, other government officials, representatives of veterans organizations, diplomatic representatives, other dignitaries, veterans, as well as the general public. In advance of the ceremony, long columns of veterans, Canadian Armed Forces members, Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers, and cadets march to the memorial, led by a pipe band and a color guard. At the end of the ceremony, they march away to officially close the ceremony. Some of the 54 Commonwealth member states, such as Canada, UK, and Australia, observe the tradition of Remembrance Day on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Other nations observe a solemn day at a different time. For example, Anzac Day is observed in New Zealand on April 25th. In South Africa, Poppy Day is marked on Sunday that falls closest to November 11th. Specialist Scott Nelson served in the Army and National Guard from 1984 to 1995. He performed duties as a special electronics device repairer, as a payroll specialist, and as a Korean linguist. He attended training in Fort Gordon, Georgia, and Monterey, California, both locations I consider to be very, very nice. A friend of his went out and purchased a Virago and took Scott for a ride. He was hooked, and within months, Scott had his own bike, a Yamaha RD400. He has been a Motorcycle Safety Foundation instructor since 1991. From the photos, you can see that Scott has a penchant for go-fast motorcycles. He is now trying to slow it down a little bit and is restoring a BMW R65. I'm proud of Scott and his service. As a side note, I did an IFMR international ride in South Africa, and Scott did a ride in France. If you are even remotely considering any overseas IFMR ride, it will likely be a trip you will never forget. World War II began the following year in 1939, and nations great and small participated in a bloody struggle. My friend, then hospital corpsman Steve Cromwell, remembered this war well. He participated in the Battle of the Bulge, had a ship go down in the Pacific, survived the Normandy invasion, survived the kamikaze attack in Okinawa, and was on the Missouri in Tokyo Bay for the surrender of Japan. A few years ago, the now Dr. Stephen Cromwell was summoned by the U.S. Congress and presented a medal. It seems he was the last living survivor from the first wave of the Omaha Beach landing. Finally, if you haven't already been impressed with Steve's colorful history, he didn't miss a meeting at his Rotary Club for over 50 years. I'm proud of Steve, his service, and his friendship. After the Second World War, Armistice Day continued to be observed on November 11th. In 1953, townspeople in Emporia, Kansas, began calling the holiday Veterans Day in gratitude to the veterans in their town. To this day, the Emporia Gazette publishes a list of all veterans that live in the area, including a complete list of Emporia residents that have been killed in combat, dating back to the Civil War. Today, about 100 Emporia residents are serving in the Middle East. Soon after, Congress passed a bill introduced by a Kansas congressman renaming the national holiday to Veterans Day. In 1954, President Eisenhower signed a bill proclaiming November 11th as Veterans Day. On Memorial Day in 1958, two more unidentified American war dead were brought from overseas and interred in the plaza beside the unknown soldier of World War I. One was killed in World War II and the other in the Korea. Americans still give thanks for peace on Veterans Day. There are ceremonies and speeches. At 11 in the morning, most Americans observe a moment of silence, remembering those who fought for peace. After the United States involvement in the Vietnam War, the emphasis on Veterans Day activities shifted. There were fewer military parades and ceremonies. Veterans gathered at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. to place gifts and stand quiet vigil at the names of their friends and relatives who had fell in the war. Families who have lost sons and daughters in war turn their thoughts more towards peace and the avoidance of future wars. Mike Emily was an aviation electronics technician second class and also a past president of the Rotary Club of the Carolinas. He recalls working 12-hour shifts 7 days a week at sea, mostly at night, due to the daily flight operations. He did get tired of being at sea, but enjoyed seeing the world, visiting many interesting ports such as Naples, Cannes, Athens, Livorno, Beirut, Barcelona, Gibraltar, Istanbul, among others. Mike recalls the crossing of the North Atlantic in bad weather. They were used to smooth sailing since this was the world's second largest ship with 5,000 sailors. Due to the weather and seas on this crossing, there were several days when they were restricted to inside spaces, and all hatches were battened down lest someone get watched overboard. They were in such rough seas that the ship took water across the flight deck. This is affectionately referred to as green water over the flight deck. As a point of reference, the flight deck is 57 feet above the waterline. Those are some pretty big waves. Mike had to strap himself into his bunk to keep from being thrown out. I'm proud of Mike and his service. You see, Mike has bought a Z4 that he will be bringing to our future events. He got pretty tired from this last ride. In 1973, a law was passed providing internment of an unknown American soldier from the Vietnam War, but none was found for several years. In 1984, an unknown serviceman from that conflict was placed alongside the others. To honor these men who are symbolic of all Americans who gave their lives in all wars, the Army Honor Guard, the 3rd U.S. Infantry, also called the Old Guard, keeps day and night vigil. If you are unaware, the unknown soldier from the Vietnam conflict was exhumed, as it has now been identified as Lieutenant Michael Blossom. There will be no more unknown soldiers. While there were no identified members from the Persian Gulf War, almost 6,000 military members and many more civilian men and women have died in the pursuit of national interest there. I served from 1971 to 1993. I spent 10 years as an enlisted man and 12 years as an officer. Pictured here are my 4 ships, which I spent about 12 years on. There were a few tense moments, but in general, I enjoyed my service, especially the technology. I got to learn about some very sophisticated systems and really enjoyed it. I am scheduled to retire again from the Navy at the end of December and plan to consult part-time for the Navy or DoD. When I was serving as an officer, I was generally expected to focus on electronics and not allowed to drive the ship. One of my commanders decided that I should learn how. During one of my watches, I was lucky enough to chase a surface Russian submarine into Vladivostok. This was very exciting and probably the closest I've ever been to causing an international incident. I am proud of my naval service and very pleased that they send me a little check every month. In 1986, the Korean War Memorial was open to the public. Lieutenant Ron Mead was in the Navy for 3 years from 1973 to 1976. And after his ride in California in Maggie Valley, he's my hero. He served in the Naval Hospital, Oakland, California, and later on U.S. Naval Air Station in Agani, Guam. My family and I spent 4 years on Guam. It gets a little small after the first couple of weeks. You may be interested to know that both of these organizations have now been closed. Ron remembers treating Vietnamese refugees in an airplane hangar. He was a dentist, and many of them were poor and had no access to dental care. There were a lot of extractions in that hangar. Ron expects that the same thing is happening with the Afghanistan refugees now. I am proud of Ron and his service. In 2004, the World War II Memorial was finally open to the public. My friend Dr. Cromwell was invited and given a front row seat at the opening ceremony. Today, hundreds of thousands of American men and women serve around the world in service of our nation. So far in the war on terror, we have had 67,017 dead and about 51,000 wounded for a total of 58,000 military members wounded or killed. I hope that you will take some time to reflect on their service, sacrifices, and contributions. I know that I may have not mentioned everyone in the club that has military service, but I do want to tell you that I'm thankful for all of your service. I also want to say welcome home. Master Sergeant Terry Moore served 8 years active duty and retired from the Army after 41 years of service. He served on active duty in both Desert Storm and Noble Eagle. Terry started out as a military police officer and ended his career as a Criminal Investigation Division CID agent investigating crime and terrorism. Terry's day job was as a Department of Homeland Security Customs agent investigating child pornography and commercial fraud. He is now retired from THS and is employed as his wife's household projects lead. In addition to his participation in our club, Terry also spends a significant amount of time working for District 7770. I'm proud of Terry and his service. Just want to mention that there's a new Rotary Fellowship, the International Fellowship of Rotarian Military Veterans. John Cram is a member. I'm not sure that military service is in the same vein as service above self. But were there no military, they may not be a Rotary International. In short, we have quite a few service veterans. I would like to extend a happy Veterans Day to them and a very sincere welcome home. Please join me in saluting our service veterans for their service and sacrifice. This concludes my presentation for this evening. Amanda looks great on that bike, don't she?
My teeny weeny bike.
Thank you so much, Jim, for this awesome presentation. You know, I learn every year. I learn something to it, and you know, I'm sure I can speak for everybody that, you know, especially with the World War II, it was affecting the whole world, and especially Germany had a special role in that. And you know, it makes me always sad that because of the stupid leading persons, you know, we get so many people suffering and dying, you know, for what? What was the reason for that? You know, and so I'm pretty happy that everybody from you guys came safe back, and thank you again for your service. And thank you, Jim, for this awesome presentation.
Okay, my pleasure.
Jim, my apologies for not getting back to you with stories, but I do have one somewhat more recent story. It's not exactly related. Well, okay, it's kind of related. This September, I got to go ride with a couple of colleagues in Thermo Fisher in what was East Germany. And these guys both served in the East German military, maybe a little earlier than when I was first over there in 1987, and we got to tour the border. You could see their guards out there with their binoculars. And here I've been working with these guys for some years, and we're sitting at a table having beers together and, you know, riding motorcycles during the day. It's funny how the world changes.
Yeah, I have a good friend from Romania, and he remembers the old days. So
yeah,
it's kind of interesting how things change.
Sure is.
God bless that it changed that way and not another way. So I'm pretty happy.
Yeah.
And I think we had it one time. Chris and I was riding in Germany together. Chris, do you want to share the story what we had when we was going to Rothenburg?
No,
Not to Rothenburg, to Fulda. Fulda.
I think you can share that story.
Oh, thank you very much. So we made a trip to Fulda. It's about 100 kilometers more northeast from Frankfurt am Main. And we were sitting in a very nice restaurant. And Chris was invited or participating on this strategic things, what was going on during the Cold War. He's a Cold War veteran. And he said, can you imagine when we were sitting in this, looking at the old buildings coming from the Renaissance, from the time of the Renaissance that was built there. And it's also an important town for the Catholic Church. It's a beautiful town. It's not that big, but it's a beautiful town and pretty old. And he said, could you imagine, we would play these games, this town would not even exist anymore. And maybe if this would happen, maybe I would not be even born. So I'm glad that it came, this peaceful revolution. And Houston, the sister city, is also in the east. It's Leipzig. So we have a pretty close relationship with the people in Leipzig. And it's only gorgeous and beautiful. And I'm happy that we are right now in this stage and not in a war stage. Thanks.
So did any of our veterans get a chance to ride motorcycles when you were active duty? Anywhere fun?
Good
I got
question.
to commute to the ship in the Philippines about 20 miles every day.
I didn't ride anywhere when I was in Iraq, but I translated quite a bit for the special ops guys, and I tried so hard to get them to let me ride their motorcycles, and they just wouldn't. But I think my favorite thing that I saw when I was in the Western Anbar province was I saw somebody riding a motorcycle with another motorcycle attached to the motorcycle with 2x4s. And he was hauling stuff on the 2x4s and hauling his family on the other motorcycle. I was like, that's ingenious. I wouldn't do it, but.
I remember riding down from Defense Language Institute in Monterey to Fort Hunter Liggett for a flight physical, because I was looking at the flight warrant program, and that was on duty in uniform and getting to ride PCH-1 when my colleagues were all in classes, Korean class. And then was it Nacimiento Ferguson Road? So I don't know, some of you might know that. Ron, you know what I'm talking about. It's an amazing road. It's like, okay, I'm getting paid to do this. It was pretty good.
I've done that
I'm
drive,
not sure if
but I
that's,
did it in
I'm
my
not sure-
Geo Metro.
I'm not sure if Nacimiento Ferguson is open now. There's they've had slides and stuff. Yeah.
I also PCS'd on a 95, 96 Kawasaki Concours from Monterey to Goodfellow AFB when I went for my crypto training. And that was a pretty neat little road trip over 3 days.
I think it's very funny that so many of us actually went to those same, because there's at least 3 of us that did Monterey, then Goodfellow.
Yeah.
It's funny. I do wonder how many linguists in the military are Rotarians. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
You know,
I've got pictures. Go ahead, Ed.
I might like to just update something that's happened with my older brother who was killed in the Philippines in 1942. He was, I understand, a victim of bombing. He was in an engineer corps. And as a result of that, no remains were ever found back in that time. So from 1942 until just about a year ago, I received a letter asking if I was the next of kin to my brother Dan. And they weren't promising anything, but they said that some remains have been found and they're now trying to identify existing family members. Well, I was born in 1939. He was killed in 1942. I have no recollection of him at all, other than the memories that came from my family through the years. And I don't think anybody in my family ever thought that any remains would be found. Now, having said that, no remains have been found, but they have taken samples for my DNA and other kinds of things to see if maybe some of the findings that they do have, if maybe I, as the only remaining direct sibling, he might be identified at least in part. So, you know, I've been thinking about this a lot since I got that letter. Actually, in May of this year is when that letter came to me, and thinking about what will that mean, not only to me and my remaining nephews and nieces who would be part of the family. So if all of you can think of something from time to time to say a little prayer or put some good wishes into the air, maybe some of my brother's remains will be found, and I'm really looking forward to that day. I don't particularly anticipate it, but hey, it's more real now than it had been for some 70 years. Thank you.
Wow.
I mean, the way that technology is advancing, I love that we use it that way, right? Like that we can use it for things like that. That's awesome.
So do we have more stories? We have more 50 minutes more time to sharing some stories from your time in the military. I was never in the military, you know, so I cannot say anything to that.
Share a funny translator story. I don't know if I've ever told you guys this one. When we were over there, we were in Iraq, our jobs that we were trained for didn't exist because there was no real army. So they grabbed a really good translator and a not so great translator and made us pair up. And my partner was the not so great one. And she was in the middle of not an interrogation, but they were questioning somebody about why he was so close to base. And he kept saying, like, she said, "Why were you so close to base?" And he would say to her, "I was tending to my landmines." And she was like, he was tending to his landmines. And they were like, "What? Ask him again. Why were you so close to base?" He was like, "I was tending to my landmines. I was tending to my landmines." And so this guy's watching this transpire as she's translating, and she realizes he realizes she's translating this wrong. Obviously, people are way too upset for what he's actually saying. So the word for landmines is el-ram, and the word for sheep is ernam. And so she was translating, "I was looking for my landmines," but what he was actually saying was, "I was looking for my sheep." So that's just one of those funny, haha, linguist stories. I had lots and lots of those. Like when I went to Spain and wondered why everybody was telling me they were constipated. And I learned that constipado doesn't mean constipated. It means stuffed up, right? Like it's just, yeah.
Constipated nose. Funny.
Yes. Why are these people so open about telling me this?
It's like never say to an Australian that you're stuffed.
Nice.
When we were in Iraq, I was with a tank unit, which was great. I had a blast. I never had to sit and listen and just stare at a screen all day long. I got to go out and do fun stuff. But one of my favorite things, as soon as they found out that I liked flying in helicopters, I got asked to go do a lot of things that involved flying somewhere and coming back. But as a young lady who grew up very close to Cedar Point with all the roller coasters, I thought flying in helicopters was the coolest thing ever. And we were taking fire from the ground a lot at those times. So we would fly really close to the ground, and they would fly what's called map of the earth. So when the helicopter would fly, you'd follow the contours of the earth to stay as low as possible. And it was my favorite thing in the entire world. So, I got to have a lot of fun actually in Iraq. And I know that sounds weird, but I got to immunize kids and build schools and redo infrastructure. And you know, it was all very, I knew that I was having a tangible positive effect every day. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Nice, John. Helicopters do be in this admission, yes.
I remember my first helicopter flight. I getting so sick after that. So that was nothing for me.
Well, that was the funny thing because everybody else was in that boat and I was the one like, whoa, this is awesome. I was leaning out the door watching and yeah,
You have to be born for that, I think.
Maybe. I got to ride in a Blackhawk in ROTC, and that was fun. It was, that map of the earth thing, but it was just one ride. Otherwise, I'd visit back in Minnesota, I'd visit the Guard Reserve units out of Fort Snelling. And on summer evenings, just hop a joyride with them. I had to show up with my dog tags and a uniform, and these pilots had to log hours. So we just flew around in a Huey, and it's loud, but it was, it's like a big station wagon in the air. They were fun.
riding in a Chinook, it's the one with the two blades.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea when you get up close that those blades interweave when they come through. Super, super weird to see in real life. And they also have jet engines on the back. I didn't realize that either, but those are fun to ride in. Those are very fun. They're very fast. I wanted to be the person, they drop the tail and there's a person sitting out there with a gun to keep you safe, right? And I was like, I want to be out there. They're like, no.
The Chinook that I got to ride in developed a hydraulic leak, and all I could see was hydraulic fluid coming down the wall and running out the door.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of being in a C-130 coming out of Qatar on our way back into Iraq. That as we came up and they put up the landing gear, it busted one of the hydraulic lines inside. It sprayed us all with hydraulic fluid. And then we got to turn around and come back into the airport. They foamed the runway because they thought we were going to crash. That was a little hairy.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to know how many really specified people working for the military. You have to look, there's Army, there's Navy, there's whatever, how many different kinds of, and then in each section are so specialized people working. It's unbelievable. I don't know how many kinds of job. I think the government or the military is the biggest. Chris, was heißt Arbeitgeber?
Specialized labor worker or something like that.
Employer.
Unbelievable.
Employer,
I
yeah.
think, right?
Right. And then I think people don't realize that even like, I say I'm a linguist, right? But there were a bunch of different flavors of linguists.
Of
There
course.
were
Yeah.
logic linguists, there were interrogators, there were analysts. That was all different. And so my job was signals intelligence. So I was supposed to listen to other armies. But you do what needs to be done. I was never trained to be a translator. That's another thing that none of us were ever trained to be translators. So that was additional duties as assigned, as they like to say in the military.
Wow. Yeah, this kind, like how it is in America, it's not in Germany. They have now private people, but it's more a defense army than an army like the Americans. It's completely a different thing, and it's not that much soldiers in Germany actually. Hi, Emilio. Nice to see you, by the way.
Nice to see everybody. Happy Veterans Day, if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
I'm trying a new device, so it's not too noisy. Contain the noise.
No, it sounds really good. Or Amelia, when you came on earlier, you put your background on.
Yeah.
Your beard became green screen as well, so we can
Oh.
see.
I like to try many things, and they don't work for me for some reason or another. I can see Scott's beautiful, background, and I can see Chris's John background, and the Rotary, and mine, they just don't work out. Just like my language skills, so sometimes they don't work out. Oh, there you go. David just disappeared on us. So, but anyway, talking about language skills and how many people I met through, like in the 80s, late 80s, I was going to university and I was hanging out to these gringo bars in Antigua, Guatemala, that we call it because that's where all the gringos go. And then it was strange that all these clean cut guys were hanging in the city and hanging out, with different people. I'm like, well, why are they here? And then I start talking to some of them. I find out that they were specialists, advisors, and a bunch of different things that they were coming for training. And at that time was the Iran-Contras issue between Nicaragua and Honduras border. So they were training people in Guatemala, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's very interesting. So I met my fair share of specialists, So some of them very, very young, 23, 24, So interesting people that I have met through the years and in the military. Oh, and when I was living in Vegas, working at the airport, I made my fair share of military people going through there. At one point, we didn't have a USO in Las Vegas until recently. I think a USO came about 10 years ago in Vegas. And then so at night, because I worked at night, 6 p.m. till 6 a.m., I would open our VIP rooms for them to stay there. Because when you get to Vegas, sometimes the entire city is sold out. And where are you going to stay? And so they would come and stay at the airport. And I'm like, no, you're not staying in the airport. Come on, let me show you our hidden VIP rooms. And that's what we did. So, and they were always grateful. Oh, Red Flag. I don't know if you are familiar with Red Flag. We have different air forces coming in to train at Nellis Air Force, and they would come through Vegas from NATO, from Germany, from different NATO countries. French, Belgium to do their flight training at Nellis Air Force. And I never failed that somebody would get stuck at the airport because no rooms. So there you go. They ended up in our VIP room couch. So, yep. Good people, fun people, love to drink people. Yeah, I have never met.
It's play hard. It's work hard, play hard.
Yeah, I know.
I highly recommend the book by Den Crenshaw that he wrote. I won't get into any politics stuff, but he gives a really good insight into what it's like to be in the special operations, just in the military in general, and it's good.
Cool.
He's a Texan congressman.
Yes, he is a Texan. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And in the Congress already.
Yep.
Yeah. He's a very impressive guy.
I actually live in his district. I see him around town. It's actually pretty interesting.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether you agree with this politics aside, I just think he's hilarious. I love what he did when he went on Saturday Night Live and kind of gave it right back to Pete Davidson. I thought it was hilarious. But
I never saw that. So after this meeting, we have a board meeting already. So if we have nothing for this meeting, I would like to have someone to maybe Deborah, what is with the 4-way test? You will lead us in the 4-way test. And Amanda, would you, make the bell for the end of the meeting? That would be great.
Sure. Okay, number 1. Is it the truth?
The truth.
Number 2. Is it
fair
to
all concerned?
Number 3.
Will
it build goodwill and
friendships?
Number 4. Will it be beneficial
for all concerned?
And of course, number 5. Is it going to be
fun?
Number 6, will we get caught?
It was covered by Medicaid.
Oh,
for those that are of age of Medicaid.
All right, I will share, and we'll do the bell, and hope I can't share.
Bell.
And everybody is welcome to share the board meeting for sure afterwards.
It doesn't want to let me share. Ding.
Yeah, I can't make it to the board meeting. I've got to conduct a work meeting. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, guys.
Oh, there
Yeah,
it
here
is.
we go, Amanda.
Yeah. Okay, there. Ding.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
I love that version of the bell has